This trial is starting. That was Judge Juan Merchan's parting thought to the courtroom in the case of the people of the state of New York versus Donald J. Trump. Today, on day 4 of the trial, the full panel of 12 jurors and 6 alternates were shown in to consider Donald Trump's fate in the historic first criminal trial of a former U.S. president. Judge Merchan told the court that opening statements would begin on Monday. That didn't stop Donald Trump's lawyers from spending part of their day trying to delay the case. The New York Appeals Court denied a motion by Trump lawyers to move the trial to a different jurisdiction. This is at least the 10th time the Trump team has been denied a trial delay request. Donald Trump isn't going to stop the wheels of justice from turning on Monday. And a key question is whether or not he'll be a witness in his own criminal trial. This is what Donald Trump told reporters today.
Mr. Trump, how is today going? President Trump, are you going to testify? Yes.
Now, this is Donald Trump we're talking about. His yes can't really be taken at face value, especially when we know what sorts of questions Donald Trump could be facing from prosecutors. After jury selection was complete, Judge Merchan held a Sandoval hearing where prosecutors revealed the lawsuits they plan on using in cross-examination against Donald Trump to get at his credibility if he takes the witness stand. Prosecutors want to ask Donald Trump about the 2 E. Jean Carroll cases, the civil fraud case, all of his gag order violations that continue to grow, the Trump Foundation case, and the sanctions order for his frivolous lawsuit against Hillary Clinton. Judge Merchan will rule on the Sandoval questions Monday, but the judge strongly indicated he would let prosecutors confront Donald Trump with this passage from the sanctions order if Trump takes the stand. Quote, Mr. Trump is a prolific and sophisticated litigant who is repeatedly using the courts to seek revenge on political adversaries. He is the mastermind of strategic abuse of the judicial process. At the end of the hearing, prosecutors once again refused to provide the defense with a list of their next 3 witnesses. Quote, unless Your Honor orders us differently, we are not supplying the name of the witness to a defendant who contumaciously violates this court's order by tweeting about the potential witnesses in this case. Judge Merchan agreed the concerns are valid in giving Donald Trump access to the witness list in advance. Prosecutors did make a concession to give the defense the name of their first witness only, and that name would be handed over Sunday night. Prosecutors said, quote, if that should be tweeted, that will be the last time we provide a courtesy. Donald Trump has already violated the gag order at least 7 times this week alone. Giving Donald Trump the name Sunday limits the time he has to violate the gag order before court resumes on Monday. Also happening on Monday, 10 a.m. Eastern, just 30 minutes after opening statements kick off in his criminal trial, Donald Trump's other attorneys will head just down the street to a different Manhattan courthouse for a civil fraud case hearing that could threaten hundreds of millions of dollars in his assets. Today, New York Attorney General Letitia James asked the judge to void Donald Trump's $175 million bond in the case, citing concerns that the bond company might not actually have the funds to back it up. Leading off our discussion tonight, Adam Klasfeld, a fellow at Just Security who is covering the trial for The Last Word. Also with us, Joyce Vance, a former U.S. attorney and a professor at the University of Alabama School of Law. She is co-host of the #Sisters-in-Law podcast and an MSNBC legal analyst. Thank you both being here. All right, Adam, Donald Trump's claiming he'll be a witness. Judge Merchan will rule Monday morning about what from Trump's past prosecutors would be allowed to raise at trial. Tell us about that.
As you mentioned, Jonathan, the objective of this Sandoval notice, as the prosecutor is put forward, is to establish the boundaries of cross-examination if Trump testifies and how to confront him with what are known as prior bad acts. Now, the point of it is to pierce his credibility, damage his credibility. It's not to raise every bad thing a court has found that he's done. And as you noted, the judge seemed very inclined to grant the motion as to the sanctions order. And it's a blistering passage saying that he's a serial litigant who weaponizes the justice system against his political adversaries. And you're going to see, I would expect the judge to apply the same kind of care that he's done in prior rulings, establishing the boundaries of what's fair game, what is too much that would go over the line in his due process rights, but also give what the runway to prosecutors to speak to his credibility. There have been a lot of court findings that he isn't a trustworthy litigant, that he ignores the gag orders. The prosecutors are requesting the gag orders to confront him with those. They're requesting to raise the E. Jean Carroll verdicts to the extent that they show that. And this is a fine line that the judges and the prosecutors are going to walk. It's not about the sexual assault on E. Jean Carroll, but the defamation is what the prosecutors said, to show his credibility that he was found to have lied about the sexual assault and actual malice. So the judge will give these rulings. He's going to put on record why he thinks it's fair game that if Trump decides to take the stand, that all of these findings from years of litigation can or cannot be used to confront him and inform him to, buyer beware if he decides to actually take that step.
Yeah, and Joyce, the thought of being cross-examined about repeated incidents showing you're a liar would be enough to keep most defendants from testifying. I know it'd keep me off the stand, but what about Trump?
Well, I guess that's the question here, right? I mean, the job for the judge, when he looks at each of these incidents, he has to determine whether the evidence has very important value for prosecutors, so much so that it outweighs any risk of undue prejudice to Donald Trump. Those are the two equities that he has to balance. And the courts in New York have said that's a decision that they leave to the sound discretion of the trial judge. It's really up to him. He's the man on the ground looking at the evidence. So you see this act after act where judges have found that Trump has abused the legal process or that Trump has lied. His lawyers are objecting, saying these are facts that have nothing to do with this case and they couldn't come in. And that's just not what this argument is about, because as Adam has done a great job of laying out, the only thing that the government could use these prior instances for, at least on cross-examination, is to attack Donald Trump's credibility so that they can then argue to the jury, you shouldn't believe anything he told you on the stand. Any defenses that he said this man has lied in the past, and you should judge his credibility today in light of all these other times that he's been less than truthful. That should be enough to keep him off the stand, but with Trump, who knows?
Right. And Joyce, as an attorney, did we learn anything this week about the control Trump's lawyers are able to exert over him?
Well, I think what we learned is that Judge Merchan does not believe that his lawyers can control him. I don't think the judge was being critical of the lawyers. I think he was just acknowledging the reality that this week prosecutors identified 7 additional instances where Donald Trump violated a clear gag order. This is a client who is out of control, a client who does not understand the bounds of propriety, who shows no concern about the safety of witnesses and family members of court personnel. This is not the typical client who listens to his lawyers. And there was one, Jonathan, just one little snippet we got from reporting in the courtroom that I thought was very telling. And it was that as jurors, potential jurors, were coming in to be questioned, everyone in the courtroom rises. That's what you do in a trial. The jury comes in and out ahead of everybody else. All of the lawyers, the defendant, everybody stands up to show respect. When the jury leaves, same thing, everybody stands up. And this week, the only person in that courtroom who wasn't doing that was Donald Trump. These were the people coming into the courtroom who might hold his future in their hands. He showed no respect for him. I know that his lawyers would have told him, we stand up for the jury, both when they enter and when they leave, to show respect. The fact that Donald Trump chose not to do that shows just how little he's willing to listen to his lawyers.
How little he's willing to listen to his lawyers, or how much respect he has not only for the jury but for this entire process that is, attempting to hold him accountable. Adam, Judge Merchan seemed to be frustrated by Trump's delay tactics, saying, quote, "At this point, what is happening is defense is literally targeting individual decisions one by one by one by one in filing pre-motion letters. That has to end, okay? There comes a point where you accept my rulings. My rulings are what they are. I have entertained the motions. I have entertained your argument in good faith. I have handed down decisions. But at some point, you need to accept the court's rulings."
And to say that the judge is frustrated with Trump's attorneys would be an understatement. We have to take a step back to see what led us to this point. The reason why we're at this point is that, in the judge's own words, that Trump's lawyers had been inundating the court with what the judge called nearly frivolous or frivolous motions right on the eve of trial, forcing him to issue an order that, if they want to file a motion, that they have to request permission. That's why in that quote, they were talking about pre-motions. Now they cannot file motions anymore. They have to file pre-motions requesting permission. And they, according to the judge, nearly violated that. He had to warn them that a couple of weeks ago that if they did not go through that procedure, he would sanction them. As you noted, Jonathan, we had this whole episode just today where we have an appellate court on the eve of trial rejecting a motion for a stay. A little bit of backstory to that. That was because the week before jury selection, we had a scenario where Trump's attorneys filed 3 appeals in 1 week seeking an application for a stay. All 3 of them were rejected, and all 3 of them sparked new appeals, one of which was rejected today. So their delay tactics are spawning new delay tactics. And it seems very clear there have been enough judges on the First Department who have seen all of this repeatedly that those are just spinning the wheels, and that all of them have been rejected, and enough of the judges have chimed in that it's very easy to see the other ones that are remaining will be rejected.
And Adam, real quickly, before we go, on Monday, another set of Trump attorneys will be in court for the civil fraud trial hearing to respond to the Attorney General asking to void the $175 million bond. What should we watch for?
Primarily, we should watch for, will it be voided? And if it does, Trump has the New York Attorney General has asked that the judge give him 7 days to find a new bond. Now, that's going to be tough for Trump. It's already a matter of public record that more than 30 different bonding companies turned him down. In the last minute, we have Knight Specialty Company, Trump's knight in shining armor, running to the rescue. It might not be enough. This one might also be voided if the judge agrees with the Attorney General that it's not sufficient. So we could be back to the situation where Trump is without a bond and at real threat for the seizure of his assets.
Ooh, Monday is going to be a big old day. Adam Klasfeld, Joyce Vance, thank you both very much for coming to The Last Word. And coming up, I'm not sure what's been weirder about this week, seeing the first former American president face a criminal trial, or reading the reports about that same former American president repeatedly falling asleep during his criminal trial. Jennifer Rubin and Michael Beschloss will try to help me make sense of all this. That's next. Verdict's in. Sleepy Don has a nightmare week. That is how the Biden campaign summed up the week in which 77-year-old Donald Trump fell asleep on multiple days during his criminal trial, the first criminal trial of a former American president ever. On Monday, a jury will hear evidence against Trump, who is accused of 34 counts of falsifying business records to interfere in the 2016 election, whose history of lying, intimidation, and multiple civil judgments against him for fraud and sexual abuse could be raised if Trump decides to testify. On Tuesday, Trump is facing punishment for violating his gag order 7 times since Monday for posting attacks against witnesses and jurors, some of which was posted while Trump was in the courtroom. Trump has been reprimanded by the judge for muttering and gesturing too close to prospective jurors. He feigns that he's campaigning from the courtroom, but is there really a majority voter constituency for criminal defendants? Meanwhile, Trump's opponent, President Biden, spent the week touting infrastructure investments, promising to protect women's rights and to provide tax relief for teachers and families. And that was after a 3-day swing through battleground Pennsylvania, meeting voters and talking about his agenda. Donald Trump is inside a courtroom where he, as a criminal defendant, must abide by the rules or face consequences, and any misbehavior is in plain view of the jury. As MSNBC legal analyst Danny Cevallos points out, performance art, especially cocky or aggressive behavior, serves Trump well at his rallies and in front of the camera. But in my experience, juries don't usually appreciate it. If the misbehavior continues, they may hold it against him. But the jury isn't the only audience. All of America is watching. Even outside the courtroom, doing his daily ranting and begging for money, Donald Trump looks tired. This is a man for whom 46% of Americans voted in 2016 when he was still known as a TV and tabloid star. And 46% voted for him in 2020 when he had president in front of his name. But now, as the Biden campaign will remind voters from now until November, quote, Donald Trump is not a confident man. He's a desperate man who knows he's losing. Donald Trump has taken over the Republican Party to enrich himself and sell out the American people to his billionaire donors. It won't help his personal life, and it can't fix his broken political campaign. Joining me now, Jennifer Rubin, Washington Post opinion columnist and an MSNBC political analyst, and Michael Beschloss, NBC News presidential historian. Jen, Michael, welcome back to The Last Word. Michael, we've become numb to it, but Trump's made history again in the worst way.
Right. More than in the worst way, I think probably in about 20 ways. You know, if any of us is numb to this, and I think we're probably not, but in case we are, imagine that this was Dwight Eisenhower or Harry Truman in court, falling asleep and being accused of what he's being accused of and behaving the way he has been. This is something the founders did not exactly have in mind for a future president. They thought that they had created a system that would exclude people that be likely to be at least accused of criminal conduct, although, of course, we don't know whether he's going to be found guilty or not. And the other thing is, you remember the guy, and I think it was a male, I don't want to assume that, but the person in the Trump entourage who said, you know, it'll be great, he can campaign from the courtroom. This can be a plus. Well, that's a classic example of turning lemons into lemonade, and doesn't seem to be happening. This guy is on display 8 hours a day during this trial, and just as you said, Jonathan, it doesn't exactly suggest that he's fit and ready to be president in almost any other respect. And the other thing, I'll close with this is someone who can't stand being out of control. Well, you know, what less control is there than being in a courtroom with a jury and a judge that is going to rule on your fate and potentially even put you in jail? It's going to drive him crazy. This is the opposite of campaigning and winning votes.
You know, Jen, Trump claims his trial is firing up his base, but is it actually helping him to be sleeping in court while Biden is out campaigning on real issues?
I think not. You know, Donald Trump wants to be the big man. He wants to be in charge, as Michael said. But every day he is diminished. There was a point at the trial today where he stood up like he was going to leave the courtroom before the judge did. And he said, sit down, Mr. Trump. And like a sheepish little child, he had to sit down again. And that just kind of sums up where he is. He can pout, he can fall asleep, whether that's an intentional snub at the proceedings or not. He can try to mumble and smirk at the jury. He can try to disregard the judge's orders. But ultimately, he's not allowed to do these things. And he will be called out, and he will have to sit there. Donald Trump is not one to control himself. So when people like Michael Cohen, like Hope Hicks get on the stand and they start testifying against him, I find it hard to believe he's simply going to sit there. I suspect he's going to start mumbling. He's going to start muttering. He's going to start gesticulating. And that's going to get him in trouble, too. So everything that he does, because he's Donald Trump, is not likely to endure to his benefit in the courtroom. And let's remember, whose base is his base? They only get one vote. And those people will probably not be swayed by anything that happens in the courtroom and anything that he says on the courtroom steps. But he's got to get a majority. And as you pointed out, at his peak, he got 46%. And he is not making friends. He is not impressing people outside. And meanwhile, Joe Biden is not only campaigning, but he's getting a little feisty. He is getting in his digs. He's noting these things like he's sleepy. He's noting that Trump is otherwise occupied, as he put it on one occasion this week. So I think the Biden campaign realizes they've got this guy trapped. He's cornered, and they're going to keep sticking it to him and giving him little jabs. And that, too, is going to weigh on Trump because he can't stand being mocked.
Yeah, he really hates it. But you know what, Michael, Politico reports that Congressman Benny Thompson, the former chair of the January 6th committee, introduced a bill to remove Secret Service protection for anyone sentenced to a year or more in jail, saying it would, quote, alleviate a conflict between the Secret Service's mission and prison officials tasked with the protection of inmates. I hear you chuckling, so finish the thought. What do you think about this?
You know, I got into this career decades ago. Of all the things I thought I would have to think about, you know, the idea of, you know, a fist fight between officers of the Secret Service and the Bureau of Prisons at, you know, Lorton or some federal prison somewhere is not something that I had exactly on my bingo card. But, you know, the other thing, and I want to endorse what Jennifer just said, you know, the other thing that shows so much in this scene, and actually in the last number of months, in 2016, that was in many ways a diabolical campaign. Donald Trump stood for some horrible things, but relative to now, he was fairly well disciplined. And this year, he is much more about making himself feel better for the next 60 seconds than running a disciplined campaign for president with a winning message. I think that to tell people in advance that if they elect you, he wants to take away their rights, be a dictator for a day, pit the Justice Department and the Defense Department against his enemies, and possibly take us out of NATO and let Putin run wild through Europe. My guess is that that's not a disciplined winning message. It's much more about his psychiatry. So I almost feel that we should applaud Donald Trump for his transparency. But if Americans understand that this is a choice between our system of more than 2 centuries of democracy versus a lethal dictatorship, I just don't see a majority of Americans voting for that.
You know, Jen, we have seen over time how the presidency ages men, only because it's only been men up until this point. But how do you see Trump's post-presidency legal and financial issues weighing on him?
I think he is truly exhausted. He's not a disciplined person. And to have to sit there and listen, and we already know he doesn't sleep well. We already know that in the Oval Office, he had executive time until about 11 o'clock in the morning. I think this is a physical as well as a mental and emotional strain on him. And you can tell he does look tired. He does look diminished. And let's face it, even before this trial, he was not doing what President Biden is doing. President Biden was out 3 days in a row campaigning. He gives speeches constantly. He meets with voters. He's conducting the country's business. Donald Trump does not have that kind of energy, does not have that kind of, frankly, money to put together a real campaign. So in a sense, this is all he has. What else is he going to do? It's not like he's going to go into a swing state and give speech after speech on the issues. That's not what he's capable of. So I think that this is really showing the limits of his physical capacity as well as his mental and emotional capacity. And by the way, to Betty Thompson, I think the Bureau of Prisons will easily accommodate the Secret Service. I am sure they could find a place.
I want to see the fist fight.
Yeah, you know, Michael, look, when you were talking about that, Michael, I mean, no disrespect to the Secret Service, but I think the folks at the Bureau of Prisons might have a little more experience with that kind of fight. Jennifer Rubin,
that is probably right. Thank God for American history, that's true.
Yes, Jennifer Rubin, Michael Beschloss, thank you both very much for coming to The Last Word. And coming up this week, one of the more factually challenged members of the House Republican caucus tangoed with one of this program's smartest frequent guests. You'll see Yale history professor Timothy Snyder fact-check Marjorie Taylor Greene. That's next.
Democrats, once again, will be the adults in the room. And I'm so glad Republicans finally realize the gravity of this situation and the urgency with which we must act. But guess what, Mr. Speaker? You don't get an award around here for simply doing your damn job.
That was the lead Democrat on the House Rules Committee, Congressman Jim McGovern, speaking today before the House voted 316 to 94 to advance a $95.3 billion aid package for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. In a rare move, more Democrats voted for the Republican procedural rule than Republicans, rescuing Speaker Mike Johnson. The House is set to vote tomorrow on that critical Ukraine aid that has been stalled for months by what Liz Cheney calls the Putin wing of the Republican Party. Our next guest, Yale history professor Timothy Snyder, testified about that on Wednesday in the House Oversight Committee.
If we follow Chinese propaganda about the ongoing Ukraine war, we notice a certain pattern, which is that the political warfare themes, which, as colleagues have quite rightly said, are meant to pass through us, have in fact done so. First, Ukrainians are Nazis, a Russian theme picked up by China, echoed on the House floor. Second, it's all about NATO enlargement, a Russian theme picked up by China. Third, Ukraine is corrupt, a Russian theme picked up by China, echoed on the House floor, echoed in the Senate by Senator Vance. Fourth, that democracies can't do anything about Ukraine, that it's all pointless, a Russian theme echoed by Chinese propaganda, picked up in House discussions. Fifth, we should pay attention to the border and not do anything about Ukraine, a Russian theme picked up by China, echoed in both chambers. Sixth, the Biden bribe, a Russian theme picked up and echoed by China, discussed in this very chamber.
Committee member Marjorie Taylor Greene, a member of the so-called Putin wing of the Republican Party, said this.
It's amazing to me that just in a few years' time, it's now considered misinformation to talk about the Nazis in Ukraine.
I'd like to thank the representative from Georgia by making clear with her comments and with her person that any discussion of political warfare has to include Russia, Ukraine, and America. She's just demonstrated that point, I think, very powerfully. On the question of Nazis, I've written 2 books as a historian about Nazis and the Holocaust. On the question of Ukrainian nationalism, I am the leading scholar of that subject in North America and have been writing about it for 20 years. If the chamber is interested in the degree of far-right participation in Ukrainian politics, you can be assured that no far-right party has ever crossed 3% 3% in a Ukrainian election. So, of course, there are bad people in every country, but by any comparative standard is a very small phenomenon. In Russia, on the other hand, the army includes openly Nazi formations, such as Rushich. The government itself is fascist in character, and it is carrying out a war which includes deportation of children by the tens of thousands, the open intention of destroying a state, as well as mass torture. So if we're looking for fascism, and if there is anyone who is sincerely concerned about halting fascism or racism, you would wish to halt Russia.
Marjorie Taylor Greene has been threatening to vote to remove House Speaker Mike Johnson because of his support for aid to Ukraine. Speaker Johnson said this about Marjorie Taylor Greene's threat to remove him from the speakership.
If I operated out of fear over a motion to vacate, I would never be able to do my job. Look, history judges us for what we do. This is a critical time right now, a critical time on the world stage. I think providing lethal aid to Ukraine right now is critically important. I really do. I really do believe the intel and the briefings that we've gotten that I believe Xi and Vladimir Putin and Iran really are an axis of evil. I think they're in coordination on this. I think that Vladimir Putin would continue to march through Europe.
Joining us now, Timothy Snyder, professor of history at Yale University. He is the author of The Road to Unfreedom, Russia, Europe, America. Professor Snyder, thank you very much for being here. What does it say that believing U.S. intelligence about Putin and Russia puts the Republican speaker's job at risk?
Yeah, it says that an important part of the Republican Party has gotten in the habit of repeating things that are propaganda tropes. Some of them are doing it because they have reasons of their own. Some of them, I think, are a little bit trapped. But I emphasize that it's not really a matter of American intelligence. It's more just a matter of objective reality. What the speaker said is true. The war is at a critical state. The front could break. The Ukrainians are fighting intelligently and courageously, but we have not passed a law to support them for something like 480 days at this point. So it's not even a matter of intelligence, just a matter of taking reality into account.
You know, Professor, I want to listen to what the chair of the House Intelligence Committee, Republican Mike Turner, and Republican Don